Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to Investing with the Difference. And as we promised to bring all the great information around EOS ecosystem, so today we are going to bring you everything about Telos. And what is Telos? I think we have already talked about it a few times on our channel. So it is a sister chain or a side chain. I think there are a lot of ways people are putting it. But of course, the key thing here is it's not going to be the mainnet, but it's going to be a parallel chain running EOSIO software. And they're trying to do a lot of changes to the way governance is implemented, the way the system contract will work. And to learn all about that, today we are going to talk with Douglas Horn, who is the white paper author for Telos. And let's bring him on without wasting any more time. Hi, Douglas. How are you doing? You're on the screen, Douglas.
Hi, Raman. How are you?
Doing good. So welcome to the show. Welcome to Investing with the Difference. I think we have been talking about Telos in some form or other. So we thought today we are going to take this opportunity to learn more about Telos. And also maybe there are a lot of questions from our viewers on what is it all about, what is going to happen, and how it fits into the overall EOSIO ecosystem. So let's get rolling. And maybe you can introduce yourself, where this idea came across and how you got into Telos.
Fantastic. Thank you, Raman. Yeah, my name is Douglas Horn. I am the white paper author and a core dev for the Telos project, Telos Blockchain Network. We, under the name EOS Americas, my group was a early, not that early, but not as early as like EOS Canada, but early enough that we were, many weeks before the actual launch, participant in the launch of EOS. And I had been a long time supporter of it. I was very excited about it myself. We wanted to get involved earlier, but it's actually quite to get a whole team going and on board for EOS took us longer to ramp up to than we wanted, and so we ended up being a little later than we intended. Anyway, I was very excited. I was excited about actually all the pieces of EOS. I like proof of work just fine. I've been involved in that over the years, but I believe that there's a great place in the blockchain world for something where there's governance, at least to the point where if your keys are stolen, you have some kind of appeal to some kind of way to try to get that back. I think that for a lot of people that's a big concern, and if we're going to mature as an industry and attract the people who are very much on the sidelines, and that's some functionality we need to integrate. So I was excited about those things. In the back of my mind, I was concerned as an aficionado of game theory and somebody who believes that people tend to work towards what their actual incentives are. I had a certain amount of concern about the hyper concentration of voting involved in EOS, since all the key decisions are made by voting. And so those are concerns I had. I didn't know how it was going to go. And then as the launch progressed, I saw some of the things that I was kind of afraid of happening, where the hyper concentrated voting in EOS sort of shoved it to a position where regular people, the sort of the middle class EOS holders, didn't really have a vote that could sway, even in aggregate, what was going to happen on the network. And I think that was not what I understood. That's not what I signed on for, really. And knowing a lot of EOS holders, I think there's so many people who are super passionate and engaged and would be our very best proponents for the EOSIO world, but who only have 1,000 EOS. And I don't think they're any less engaged than the people who maybe have 1 million EOS. I think it's just a question of what means they have. And I think if we lose them from the system, from the whole EOSIO system, I think it's a loss for us, for the system. And so I thought if there was a chain that did not purport to be EOS, was not EOS Cash or not, any kind of system like that, but was within the ecosystem, where people like that who had signed on early could have a meaningful vote in how that network evolved and was managed, I thought we could keep those people in the system as engaged participants. So that's how we launched. That's the idea behind Telos, and there were fortunately several other people in the system who thought that was worth trying out and that you could build a really valuable network based on that thesis.
Understand. No, I think I hear you. I think there's a lot of people who have opinions around how this DPoS system is working. But I think that was like, as people I have kind of agreed to in the end for the mainnet, is that ultimately it's a proof of stake and you need to have a stake in it. And maybe these big whales, some of them may be questionable. We all have been questioning that. But it's how do you define like proof of stake in your view of the world? If by buying more stake, if I'm not getting more say in the system, why is that still a proof of stake?
So, well, I mean, it's by definition, it's proof of stake or delegated proof of stake, because that is how on Telos everything works. We don't change the way. We just change the way that we distribute our tokens in a very small way. Actually, we distribute them exactly 1-to-1 with the EOS snapshot, except for 1,098 accounts, which is 0.67% of accounts. And for those, we cap it, because that is, we did some math, and that's where it works. Interestingly, by capping that, we initially remove 81% of the token supply, if you can imagine, with just that many accounts. Now we've done some other calculations as part of this, and we expect the token supply to increase to 331 million or thereabouts once all the EOS that are frozen on exchanges are brought back into the system under this cap rule, which I think will happen, not immediately, but it will happen. Because once we build value of the token, people will want it back, and it takes time for people to get used to the idea. So I think we're not changing the mechanism. What we're doing is we're saying, hey, let's start up a whole new network that we think could not take anything away from anyone at EOS. Let's actually recreate EOS with a few different changes that we think might be better. A lot of those are just network security things, like testing out the BPs to make sure that the standbys actually can produce and things like that, those types of innovations. But let's distribute our tokens on this model. We give some people fewer tokens than they had in EOS, but we're really not taking anything away from them. And then let's see how it works let's try it out on that basis. And we believe that we can build a very valuable network because we have the awesome EOSIO software to work with. Right? We get to start with that. We've made some really cool innovations that I would like to mention when you have a chance, because I think that they could actually be beneficial for the EOS world too. We make some really good things that could help on EOS, and and when I say they, I mean I'm an EOS. I'm here because I was an EOS holder. I still am. I don't plan to not be one. We aren't looking. It's not at all a situation where we're trying to be directly competitive. I think if anything, we're going to be competitive, that friendly competition that makes everybody try a little harder and be a little better, and the whole all the token holders in aggregate be better off because there's a drive, right? I think it's that kind of thing.
All right. No, I think that's a great view. So definitely there are, as I said, like this is all about bringing new point of views, and I think you're going, and it's only going to help learn new things, because ultimately it's a social experiment, the way the governance is working, because till now blockchain was not designed to be governed. It was just the code, and that's how it used to operate. So it's a good debate. I think even in mainnet, we see there's a lot of discussion. There are still 2 versions of constitutions out there. There are still referendums being put into place. So I think this is what I have been highlighting in the channel and educating people, that we should not be forming camps here. We should look at it as an experiment, which can really benefit the whole ecosystem based on how it all goes. So before
I agree. I mean, and it is an experiment in the same way EOS is an experiment, in the same way people say America is an experiment, right? I do want to be clear that we are trying to build a network of great value that where developers can deploy dApps and where people can use it. It's not just an experiment. It's that kind of experiment, and it absolutely is that. But it's also we're building a very serious, robust, resilient network.
Sure. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. So when I said the experiment, I definitely did not want to underplay Telos, but I was trying to highlight the governance part of it. The governance in blockchain is still in early days. I think we have to learn a lot. And I think that's where it's different. So let's, so as I said, before we jump into more differences in Telos, let's, because people do not understand a lot about Telos. So let me ask a very few quick questions, maybe because you are the white paper author. So you are the best person to answer these. So do you have so right now you have chosen to cap like 40,000 Telos token for per person at the Genesis. So is there any way you are doing this for future? For example, if I'm a whale, and I can go and buy Telos whenever it lists, and again create a big pool and create influence in Telos. Are you creating a mechanism to cap the votes in future for people who start accumulating more tokens?
We're not, because for a few reasons. First of all, that doesn't work. That's only going to create an impediment for the regular user. And anyone who's a whale and wants to circumvent that will absolutely be able to do it. So it really just limits the regular usefulness of it. Even if we had biometric identities, you look at there's companies in China that are multi-billion-dollar companies that you could find their supposed stockholders in small villages, and these people don't realize how rich they are on paper, because it's just, there's a lot of ways to circumvent such things. So that wouldn't solve anything. So I personally am not a believer in doing like kabuki moves that are all for show and have no real substance.
I understand. So what you're saying is, so your main goal is at the Genesis right now to control the way the chain is launched with less impact from whales and with a wider EOS community, which bought into the 1 year long ICO, and that they should be making the decisions. That's how I see this going.
Yeah, well, we'd like to get as many people in as possible. We thought there's a lot of ways that we could potentially do the snapshot. We decided to do the initial snapshot, both because it also helps prevent circumvention of the cap, but also because we feel that, those people should be rewarded. Those people who got in earliest should be rewarded. I know that some people will say, well, wait a minute, you're capping these people. They're not getting the same level of reward, and that's true. But they're still getting 40,000 tokens in Telos is probably going to be worth quite a bit. It's not going to be worth the same as 1 million tokens, right? But people do ask. So there's this question, like, if you don't put some kind of barrier to future purchases, aren't you just going to get new whales? I think that's probably what you're alluding to.
Yes. And
the reality is that the initial economics have a very powerful influence on preventing that. Certainly, again, I've said this many times, Telos is not anti-whale at all. Whales, big holders are often very important proponents of a system, but they're also sometimes not. And as we've seen on EOS, or as there's concern especially in a form of blockchain that is governed by pro rata votes, that is a really big potential exploit for the network if you have hyper concentrated voting. So the thing is here, if you were, by starting out in a situation where even the very largest Telos holders start out with a maximum of 0.012% of the total money supply, right? You make it very hard for whales for people to accumulate huge amounts. And I'll give you an example. Partly because if people start buying and buying and buying, the price increases. And certainly they're, given enough money, somebody could do this. Somebody could go and collect, let's say we have this 331 million Telos money supply, and a small number of people really want to capture, control of this, and they get the nightmare scenario of 100 million telos, right? I think we agree that would be a very, very large incentive or a very large portion that they would acquire that would become expensive for them to do. But let's say out of the 331 million, they get 100 million. That would be the nightmare of centralization for telos. But that nightmare would be an unachievable dream of decentralization for EOS, right? If you had a handful of people controlling just a third of the network instead of close to 80%, that would be an incredible improvement in decentralization for EOS, right?
No, I understand.
Which is the nightmare scenario that we're trying to think that we're worried might happen on Telos. So it's just orders of magnitude different. And I think that we would never really get to the hyper centralization that we have on
Understand. Okay, so let me ask some other questions then. So now just to clarify, so everybody who has more than 40,000 tokens, they will only get 40,000, and everybody else who is less than 40,000, they will get 1:1. So this is on Genesis snapshot, and when can we expect this airdrop? Can you highlight that part to the viewers?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad I have a chance to talk about this. So as participants in the EOS launch, we saw that the date was extremely important. That's what everyone cared about. And what got lost were a lot of the pieces that are kind of necessary to make it work. And I know that a lot of people don't want to get super into governance. I think you don't care about governance until somebody's stolen your tokens and you want them back, and suddenly you care very much about governance, right? So, we decided that instead of having a checklist, instead of having a date approach, right, where there's a countdown and when you hit 0, you're supposed to launch, we said, let's take another approach. Let's bring out this idea of a checklist approach. Let's make sure that we have a checklist of every single thing that we intend to do, that we promise, that we feel is important. Let's put those right up on our website as a checklist that anyone can check anytime, keep us honest. And when all those things are green, then we'll launch. Yeah, so if you go there and you go to launch, yep, there it is. That's the checklist, right? So, and this is going to get updated in a few hours, so there'll be a couple more green checks. But look, when all these things are green checks, that's when we'll launch. So we have set and so we have a first no-go date of September 28th at 1600 UTC. Now, if you look at these are a lot of things. We've got a lot of check marks, but we also have a lot of yellows, and even if those, filled in yellow circles, and even if we get those going, and I think it's unlikely that we are going to be all green checks. And frankly, even if we were, so one of the things we're doing is for example, is that we're saying to everybody who lost their keys on the EOS system, that we have a really great opportunity to go and rekey your accounts and be sure that you are an EOS Genesis owner, because they can use the sign message function. And you can even go here on this account if you go to key recovery. And we say, okay, we're going to give all these people the chance to get their keys back, right? So, but we haven't, so we're still, I think the Korean version of the just went up and Chinese is going up soon. And so even if there were all green check marks, I personally would have a hard time feeling like we had given people enough time. I think we should give them another week or two. I don't know how the vote's going to go, but my guess is that we are going to look at this on Friday morning my time on American West Coast, and say we do not have all green check marks. So therefore, we're instead of voting right now, we're probably just going to have a very boring talk about when these other things are likely to turn to green check marks.
Sure.
I don't know how it's going to go, but that's how I think it's going to go, because that's how I think it should go. We are new to people. We need to prove ourselves. And I think one of the ways to prove ourselves is to be consistent in our messaging and actions. And that's what that would be.
Sure. Now, I think we'll wait for that. I think it's not very far away. So we are talking about 2 days from now. So we see a lot of partners listed here, and I believe most of them are block producers. So how do you see this as like what is really the role of these? Like, are they very similar to EOS mainnet block producers? Or they have similar kind of a voting mechanism? Because if right now, let's say if you decide a go vote, then you will launch it, and will you have a similar 15% voting for deciding the producing nodes? So what's the plan for Telos?
Right. So that's a great question. So, and I want to point out that these are really just our participants who have logos, right? So so it's a fully open group. Anybody who's interested can join us, right? We started with about 12 small groups, and we now have over 100 contributors, some of them belonging to some of these groups and some of them being individuals from around the world. For a long time, every single day somebody new joined us. These are people who joined us out of Telegram and Discord and Twitter, and I'm very proud of that because it's truly a grassroots group. Not everybody has a logo, so they don't all show up on the logo page. So those are our contributors, over 100 people who are not getting paid to do this. They just believe in it. It's kind of an old school crypto idea that, there's no ICO, there's no pre-sale. All those things actually come together to make it extremely secure against being called a security, right? Because we didn't raise any money. It's not live before the network is live. There's no token before the network's live. There's no company, right? It's purely, truly decentralized, which is kind of rare these days to have a project of this size be able to do that. So, but to answer your question, if we were to vote, when we vote, we will some hours later, I think it's 8 hours later, actually launch. People will be able to get onto the network using any multi-chain wallet that they wish that's available at that time. Currently, that's Scatter Desktop, and our version of EOS Gray Mass EOS Voter, which was with their blessing, forked because we wanted to add multi-chain functionality and a few other things that they didn't have time to put on their roadmap. But we're working with them. We're going to offer those back up as pull requests so they can just add that in. It's an extremely friendly process. We're not trying to steal from anybody. So, but it's a trusted wallet, and it's open source, and people can look to make sure that we're not taking their keys. So people will go into their keys, or if their keys are already entered in their wallet, like Scatter, from their Genesis, they can just get right on there. Interestingly, people will vote for block producers, and those block producers will be the ones who launch. People can also vote, by the way, for arbitrators. Right? So our arbitration process is one of the things that we will launch with, right? And again, nobody cares about it until you care about it, until somebody steals your keys, and then you care about it a lot. So, I think we actually have our first, if you look at our arbitrator program, this has details, and I think we have at least one brave soul, if you scroll down, who has actually signed up as a candidate to vote for. Mark Gagne from Canada, very accomplished. I think if you look back within a few days, we will have several more. So I'm actually very proud of this. It's a very open system, so we will get people to vote for block producers. We will get people to vote for arbitrators. We will get people just getting on the system, right? I believe so. When you talk about the 15%. EOS had a system. Let me talk about that's about. EOS was the block one only sold, it sold EOS tokens, and they said we're not going to have anything to do with launching the network because they wanted, for whatever reasons, I believe the reason is that they wanted to have a firewall between them and the network so it wouldn't look like they were behind the security, right? For whatever reason, that's what they did. That's the process they set up. And so they said, so the thinking was that any number of candidates could emerge. And they wanted to have some way for all these people who had bought the tokens to say, no, this is the one we want. Not this one, not this one.
Mm-hmm.
This is the one that we want. And so what they came on with this number, 15%. Dan Larimer has said it's basically arbitrary. There are some reasons for it, but it was enough to signify. Now, what happened in the launch process is we all agreed, you know what, let's have one, because frankly, only about 40% of people have even claimed their, of EOS token holders had even claimed their key in a way that they would even be able to vote. So getting multiple changes is going to be difficult. So we all made this one mainnet pledge for EOS. And we abided by it, and so we voted for one. But the thinking was, when that 15% came out, that there could be any number of chains, and they wanted to do sort of a longest chain version, most delegated proof of stake to authenticate it. For Telos, no such situation exists, right? We didn't sell any tokens. We didn't have our plan that we're going to put it out there. And so while initially, and in the white paper, we discussed the 15%, what we realized, and partially from looking at the mechanics of voting, and partially in other ways, that was specific to EOS. There's no reason that it should be done with Telos. And we also have DApp developers who are eager to get onto Telos. So I believe, and this is going to come out as an official proposal most likely tomorrow, but the intent is probably, what we're probably going to do is say at 1 million blocks, which is 5.8 days after launch, assuming there's no problems, we are just going to activate. That'll give everybody plenty of time, twice as much time to vote as they had on EOS. Before activation, roughly. Plenty of time to vote, plenty of time to figure out who our block producers are likely to be. We will have at least 40 block producers in the running, but we have up to 51 paid slots between block producers and standbys. So we're we'll get the system up and running, and then the DApp developers can start deploying. One of the downstream functions of not ever having any tokens to work with until we actually launch is that it's hard to get. It provides an extra complication for getting onto exchanges. We have exchanges who have said, Dexios has publicly said they're going to support us as a EOS Telos trading pair. We have others in the wings that are going to come out with additional trading pairs. We think it's only good for the network to let these groups have sort of a timeline, know when that's going to happen, as opposed to waiting for voting that just is of no consequence. So that's what our process is. What do you think about that, Mom?
So no, I think it's interesting to hear your thoughts. So let me just summarize what I understood. So you're saying that there is no limit. There's a time-bound based activation. So once you have a go vote, after 1 million blocks are produced, and you do some testing that it's working fine, you will just activate, and then you will start producing official blocks and start paying. And you're saying that there is no concept of 21 block producers. You have 51 paid block producers, and they will all be producing blocks. Is that correct?
That is right. Yeah. And we don't know how many we'll have. We currently have about 40. We'll have more. More are coming in all the time. And of course, anyone can come in. That's how it works. So we don't know how many we'll have. We'll have 40, I'm sure. And so that's pretty much the process.
All right. So in EOS, like when we have 21 block producer, they have like their time slots, and they keep rotating within a 2-minute and a 6-second period. So how does Telos work? Like, does it have all 51 producing, or they are backup? So can you expand a little bit more? So it looks pretty much like a big difference in how EOS is operating versus how Telos is going to.
No, it's extremely similar, actually. So we have 21 block producers, right, who are the elected block producers, who are in the exact same schedule. They take turns doing 6 blocks or 12 blocks at a time over 6 seconds, and then they hand off to the next. Exactly the same. We have, instead of having ranging number of standby block producers. We have 30. We have exactly 30. And there's a reason for that. On EOS, you can have a large number. It's all based on voting, but there's no testing that's ever done to make sure that a standby block producer can actually do the job of block producing, right? Which is, that's not actually a good network security design principle. I think anyone knowledgeable about that would say that. We said, and as a result, what's the value of having 100, of paying 100 when you could, when you don't know if they can even do the job if ever called on, right? They're not really truly standbys in that way. Now, many can, certainly, but you don't know, right? So what we decided to do is we said, let's test them. We built our own scheduler. It's based on the existing scheduler, but it has additional features in that. Number one, every 5 days, each of the 30 standby block producers is brought in to produce blocks for 6 hours. And I mean, these are people who are also elected, right? It's not it's only these 30. For 6 hours they produce. We know they can do it. They're set up to do it. If they can't do it, they have time to fix their problems. If they really can't do it, if anyone really can't do it, because we have this scheduler that we built, we have a very easy way to say anyone who is not producing blocks as they should is kicked out. And you know what? It's no big deal. It's no big deal. Fix your, if you're always kicked out, maybe the voters should take notice of that and vote in other ways. But if you just have a problem one time, rather than have a network insecurity of the network, like 2 or 3 are down and there's nothing that can be done and everyone's pulling their hair out. Instead of that, we just have the system just rotates them out, because we've built this rotation system that's fluid enough that it doesn't just work on this one schedule. We can bring people in as things change. And so if somebody has a problem, you could be number 1 in votes, but if you have a problem, you get rotated out, you fix it, and number 22 or 23 or whatever comes in, and it's not a big deal, because that's actually how network security should work. All right. So that's actually an innovation that we have. That's one of those things I was talking about that EOS could really benefit from. I think it's better network security. And as a result, we pay all our block producers the same, and we pay all our standby block producers the same as each other. So a standby makes half as much as a block producer, and all the block producers make as much as each other, because they're essentially doing the same job, and we are asking more of our standbys, so we pay them more.
All right. So I think then what I'm hearing is that so you still have 21 block producers who are producing, and the standby backup block producers will be brought in to test on a regular schedule, and
Yep.
they're getting paid half of the producing nodes. And so the voting will be all about getting into top 21 and whether you are there. But if you have more than 51 join, then it will be very similar to EOS, where you need to be, first of all, get into 51 to get any rewards. And that is, I think it's a good innovative model. It will be interesting to see how it operates, in the sense that how this dynamics play out, how the voting plays out. So now as a voter, so let me again, I think we started with the question on when the tokens will be available to claim. So as you explained, that it will be through either Scatter or a kind of a branch of Greymass wallet, which you have created. But will users have to put in their private keys, or they can actually just change the network today if they are already using Scatter or Greymass? Can they just simply claim their tokens without entering their private keys physically?
Yeah, so for somebody who is on Scatter, let's say, and they've entered their Scatter desktop, right? Because Scatter has deprecated the Chrome extension, and they're trying to get everybody off that for very good security reasons, right? So let's say you're on Scatter desktop, and you still have the same keys as your Genesis keys on your account, right? As an EOS token holder. You should, we're gonna give everyone the chance to test this out in a couple of days when we inject the snapshot into the test net. But you should be able to just pull down, our plan is that you just pull down the drop down and go from, where it says EOS mainnet Jungle testnet, Telos testnet, and then it'll say Telos mainnet. You should go on that, and you should be able to use your exact same account without having to enter anything new.
Understand.
That is how it should work.
All right. And will you create some kind of a web portal using Scatter to vote? So you talked about the voters will be able to do that. So that's great. I think this is one of the concerns which people had about sister chains. If you are claiming, people do not know how to trust putting their private keys. But if somebody
don't trust, don't give everyone their private keys. We don't want them. You trust the wallet you like. Do that way, but do not give anyone who tells you that they're from Telos and they need your private keys is a scammer. We will never tell you that. I want to be very clear about that, and people are right to be concerned about that. We're not asking for people's private keys. Now, one thing we did do is as part of our key recovery, we have people, they just provide us their public keys that they want and a signed message. But if you are somebody who never registered and you have to use what's called the fallback method, which is a way for those very few people who never actually registered their EOS tokens to get keys, EOS Authority has a good portal for that and a good description. And we decided rather than just recreate that, we would just point people there because people know them more and they're more trusted. And, we didn't want to not do the work, but we just thought, why don't we point people to people who are already in this community who have a lot of trust so they don't ever have to trust us. So they may have to use their Ethereum private key for that method. It's a very small group of users who will do that, but it won't even be with us. It'll be with EOS Authority, who most people have a lot of trust around.
So I think in other words, as long as you have the Genesis keys and if you have not changed them, and if you enable, or even if you have changed them, you can go back to your Genesis keys, set up the Scatter account.
Yeah, exactly. You have to go look back in through your notebook or whatever, with your old Genesis keys, put those in to something that has nothing to do with us, not a web-based portal, nothing like that. Scatter is great. Squirrel is great, and then you can use that, and then there will be a portal up so you can vote. I mean, our block explorer is up right now. We actually have 2 block explorers, and both of those will allow voting, just like EOS block explorers. We'll have a separate portal for voting for arbitrators, submitting worker proposals, and submitting ratify amend, because as soon as it activates, you're going to be able to do that if you want, and I think somebody will.
So Douglas, I think let me tell you one thing. So before we jump onto the worker proposals, referendums, an average token holder, I don't think there are a lot of people who are going to participate based on my understanding, how I see, unless you give rewards. I think that's something which everybody's waiting for on mainnet about Rex and so on. We will touch upon that, but let me just conclude on this question about the token holders. So they are going to be using these wallets, and let's say they claim it. What about the account names? Will they share their account names with EOS, or you will allow them to create a different account names, that well-corrected names? And first of all, are there same rules around the account names?
Yeah. So the short answer is yes. Right. So because we're using the snapshot, there will be the exact same account name as on the snapshot. I think doing anything else would just confuse people. So they will have it, but then they can create all the new accounts they want if they want to move that off there. The rules will be the same around the 12 digits, 12 lowercase letters and 1 through 5. There will eventually, one thing we haven't really put any thought into yet is name auctions. I'm not crazy with the way that's being done on EOS right now, I think, but that's not a core function for us. We figure we have some time, especially because all it would really serve to do is give a huge reward to the very first few people who got onto the system. And so we're going to wait on that. But otherwise, yeah, you can name your thing any 12 digit name that's available, just like on EOS. Right. But there won't be, the one thing there won't be is, so if you look at Warbly did a snapshot recently, I think on the 7th of September. And as my understanding, just as a fan of theirs, if you had an account name on EOS at that time, then you will have that account name on Warbly as well. But since we're only using the Genesis snapshot, anything created since the Genesis will not be on Telos. You'll have to recreate that.
Understand. So a person who, any account which was created after Genesis, that can be created with a totally different key pair on Telos and a totally different owner. That is understood. Now the question is, how do people create accounts? So do you already have the system up and running to create accounts? What about the RAM? So can you share a little more about how this will work in Telos?
Yeah, you cut out for a second there, but I think you were asking how do people create accounts and then talking about RAM. Was that?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So you create accounts. So here's something we believe that accounts should essentially be free. That not having free accounts is an impediment to adoption. I think there's a lot of studies that show this very conclusively. So we said, because we have, in addition to the worker proposal grant system, we have something called the Telos Foundation, which is a promotional promotional organization and grant writing organization that has an initial endowment of 6 million tokens. And those tokens are really to get things off the ground. For example, we looked at the fact that there were bootstrapping problems on EOS, where it was hard, there's all these poor folks working on the ECAF are working really hard for months and months and months with no pay because no one can figure out how to get them some pay. So we said, we're gonna have that same problem if we don't learn from this. And so right from the very start, we had, back in July, we had something called the Telos Foundation. That's gonna write a grant just to be able to get those initial needs for getting arbitration going. It's also going to write a grant, an initial grant right away to make sure that the first million tokens, first million new accounts are free. There will be some common sense, protection so that that doesn't get abused. But we're going to set those aside, maybe in tranches, maybe not a million all at once, but we'll set those resources aside along the way. And we're going to actually let other wallets do that, because we feel like there will certainly be a portal on our site on telosfoundation.io. But additionally, we think we'll get better penetration into different communities if we share that with wallets. And since all we were really trying to do is get people onboarded onto the system, it's great if a wallet or a DApp wants to be the gateway for that. We will cover the cost as long as they're being responsible about not letting people just create crazy amounts of these. So that's going to start. So accounts will be free. You can already look in Squirrel Wallet right now. There's a free account set up where basically funds are put into a certain account, and those funds are used to create new accounts. So on our portal, on our site, there'll be a portal to just create a new account. There'll probably be a CAPTCHA, and it'll probably look at your IP address, and if you want to VPN and in from 8 different places and get 8 accounts, it'll probably be fine to do that, because that's how, because we all know workarounds, right? But yeah, so people will be able to do that. People will be able to do it through the dApps that are deploying on us, because then they get a customer as well. And that's fine, right? And they also can go into different languages and places that we might not be great at getting into right away. So that's how new accounts are going to work. How RAM is going to work is this. If you've seen our white paper or some of our videos, RAM, we are going to take a slightly different approach. We're still going to use the Bancorp model. We've gone back and forth about this a lot, but we think that the negatives, the positives we might get are unclear, and we think that's fine. The Bancorp system is fine. We're going to do a couple things. One is we're going to start with a lower amount of RAM, actually, which is fine because we have a lower amount of accounts, right? Or we have the same number of accounts, we have a lower number of tokens. So the per token, we'll probably start with something that's around a similar per token amount. So we'll have a similar price. We will use set RAM rate from the very start. But by starting low, it means that by starting not at 64 gigs, like EOS did by starting probably closer by maybe between 8 and 16 gigs, we are able to have a whole lot of overhead that we could bring down on crazy speculation, right? We're probably going to set a slightly higher initial price. That's one of the learnings that we had from EOS, that the price was probably started so low that it created this momentum in speculation. And if we started at a more realistic place, that might be blunted. But we have a tool that so starting low is a good tool we're going to use. Using set RAM rate from the very start is a tool that the Telos or the EOS mainnet also uses, that we're going to adopt because we think that's good and that technology is great. Something else we're going to do though is, because we have a Telos Foundation, we are going to use one sort of tried and true real world method, which is to set a guidance price. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to have an administration there, somebody who can't trade RAM on their own account or anything, who is an economist who basically says, here's how much system RAM there is, here's how many users there are, here's what the usage have been, and here's what we think, here's the trend over the last couple months. Obviously in the beginning, there's not going to be any way to look back at that, but over time there'll be trend lines, and they can look at that and they can say this, therefore over the next 2-month period, every 2 months they're going to come out with a report, and they're going to say this is where we think RAM should be, based on just the natural economics of the situation, if you ignore speculation. And so that is what we're going to call our published guidance price. We're going to publish that. 1 hour later, we're going to be able to trade on that, right? We'll give everybody else a head start. And when the actual price is below the published guidance price, the Telos Foundation can buy. And when the actual price is above it, the Telos Foundation may sell. And that is to reduce the amount of speculation that happens in the system. And then there's one special part of this, which is, since all this RAM really exists for DApp developers, right? Everyone needs a little bit, but mostly it's to get DApp developers on the system. We are going to say, okay, the Telos Foundation, when I say we, I mean it's whoever's running it at the time, but the Telos Foundation is going to say, the Telos Foundation, are going to stick to our guns at this published guidance price. Anytime the actual market price for RAM is 10% higher than the published guidance price or more, we will sell to any developer who's going to release a DApp in the next 2 months at the published guidance price. So it basically says, so all the speculation is around, the goal of speculation is to sort of capture a market where someday a big DApp developer has to come in and buy at your price, right? That's how that.
So
yeah,
now
we're going to short circuit that so that it's really unlikely to go much over 10% of the published guidance price.
I think
without these hard draconian market controls, just a very simple incentive to keep it within a reasonable channel.
Sure, Douglas. No, I think thanks for explaining all that. I think it's a pretty interesting take on the RAM market. To be frank, I think there can always be cases against, as you said, there is always a debate on what's the better model. So what I'm seeing is that you are taking more like the Federal Reserve model, where you say, okay, we are going to help control and maybe create some kind of stability in the market. This can be debated. Means I may have my personal views against it in terms of whether you call it like in a decentralized market versus centralized. There's always a debate. If EOS does it, I'm sure you have the luxury of not being in the limelight of a 4 billion ICO. So you may not get that kind of. These experiments are definitely going to help learn some new things in the EOSIO ecosystem.
Can I point out one thing about the Federal Reserve comparison? And that it's a great comparison. It's a real world model that we are looking at, but of course, I'm sure most of us in crypto don't love central banks, right? So I want to say this is one tool that a central bank uses to provide stability in a market. The Telos Foundation is apolitical. It doesn't vote. And it doesn't have any of the other things that really make central banks problematic, which is like the ability to print new money, the ability to do quantitative easing where you're buying up tons of things, the ability to like do special lending deals to favored partners. There's about 8 things that central banks do, and we do one of them. We don't do any of the other 7. So
Sure.
you're right about that, but it does not. The Telos Foundation is by no means a central bank.
No, Douglas, I think I fully understand. It's not the intention to just do it like.
I just want to clarify. I'm sure you get it, Ramon. I just want to be really, since we have this chance, we're talking about it. I don't want it to come out, oh, they're recreating a central bank. That's their big idea.
I understand. I don't know. That should not be the takeaway. So I think that's great. You clarified. I'm glad. But let me tell you, like, it will be definitely interesting to see how people play out. If you really get a lot of interest from people with free accounts, with RAM trading, with the kind of a predictable model. But you're saying that you're still allowing RAM trading, you're still allowing people to buy in and speculate with certain areas where you will be trying to control. So this is interesting because I think we will learn over time how you need to adjust, because you talked about 6 million Telos tokens. What if you run out of them, if speculators run it against you? There are a lot of cases we can talk about. Of course, we will run out of time if we do that in this call. Right. But I think this got me thinking. But as I always say, this is something which we need to learn by doing things. And Telos is taking a path, and you have got a very good, smart bunch of people with you, with the kind of block producers who could not make it in the paying slots in EOS, and I have been interacting with some of them, and I really see that they're a really smart bunch of people. So I'm sure there will be more innovations. So I think it's great. So we'll wait for this mainnet launch, and we are going to see how these new things go. I think we have a lot of other things to talk about Telos. I'm sure we should do more sessions for our audience if they have questions. But before we wrap up today, so what else you would like to add in terms of what Telos is doing, and how should people see it in the overall EOSIO ecosystem? And especially, you talked about dApp developers. If you can give some sense of what kind of dApp developers you are interacting with, or you are foreseeing in near future to deploy on Telos.
Yeah, so we've been very fortunate. We have had a lot of interest from dApp developers. We had a flurry of interest when the RAM prices were so high, and a lot of people were actually going off EOS altogether, like Ono and places like that. They were just going to launch their own, and they saw this as a sort of a fallback to, of course, we weren't near launching yet. What we're seeing now, and I can't reveal any because it is for the dApp developers to reveal themselves, right? We either have NDAs with them, or we have handshake agreements to let them do their own publicity. People are very interested for the very simple reason, if nothing else, it's just going to be really cheap to get deployed on Telos right away, because the token is going to be worth 3 to 4 times in network resources what a EOS token is, right? Because there's fewer of them. We have the same resources, and there's fewer, and so each token buys more resources. And then also, they're new. People don't know. You're right. We didn't do a $4 billion launch, ICO. People don't know. People are just starting to discover us. But to dApp developers, it's a very interesting prospect. They also like the fact that in our network operating agreement, which is our version of a constitution, we do not say that that dApps have to be open source. So in the EOS constitution, one of the articles is that all dApps deployed have to be open source. There's a couple people who aren't doing that right now, and I think the network has to decide whether they're going to enforce their rules or not. But that is the rule, and they could choose to enforce that at any time. But on ours, we say no. Not only do you not have to do that, but if somebody infringes, there's an arbitration process for keeping everything on the net to say, hey, these guys are infringing on our code, and somebody qualified can like Mark Gagney, who is a great background, can hear everybody's cases and see if there's a need for the network to make a judgment. Those things mean a lot to developers, right? Mm-hmm. Mainly being cheap, being able to deploy for a 50th of the cost or a 20th of the cost of EOS. That is interesting to them. Us paying and paying for at least the first million and probably the second and third million, who knows, new free accounts, because I think it should just be an ongoing thing. I think that's a great use for inflation. Us paying for that is, as a network, is very interesting because they don't want to pay because in aggregate, they are paying to get their own users on board is expensive, right? These are expensive things. It's dApps are new and people are trying to build a business model that doesn't have a lot of revenue up front. So they're very interested in it. It lets people experiment more. If nothing else, it lets us bring in a whole class. So we've got some big dApps that are very interested, but we also have a lot of developers who are saying, hey, I didn't know how I could engage in EOS with the prices, but suddenly with Telos, there's, my little idea seems worth going after because it's going to cost, $2,000 to deploy instead of $100,000, right? So it really opens things up to innovation for smaller players and young teams and innovators who aren't backed. Our ethos aligns pretty well since we ourselves did no ICO or raise or anything like that. So I think you'll see two kinds. I think you'll see very cost-conscious, larger programs of dApps, and then you'll see a flurry of sort of people joining right away with dApps because it's just kind of a sandbox, right? I'm a big believer in sandboxes because even if 90% of them don't turn out to anything long term, those 10% can really surprise you and can organically grow into something that's really strong for the network. I mean, I think that's the promise of EOSIO. As to what our part in EOSIO is, it is very friendly. It's the friendly competitor who is going to make everyone work a little bit harder, make the system better for everything, who is going to offer back new code like inverse weighted voting, which was done, which by the way is a way to say if you vote for 1 or 2, your vote doesn't count for quite as much as if you vote for 30, right? There's a sine wave. This is done. It's working great on our system. Mainnet could use this. EOS Mainnet could use this. So we're giving back that. We're like a returner of code because we've been a recipient of code and we continue to be. But we're not. So we're an active, responsible participant in this group. We give back. Some people don't care about governance so much, but some people do. And since the EOS network is still looking for models, we have a lot of documents. We have like 60 pages of governance documents that they can look through and see if there's any good ideas they want to adopt. And then we have about 8 brand new core level code things like this system, like the voting, like the system scheduler, like the ability to kick off non-producing block producers, like an entire voting system that we added so that you could vote for block producers. We added a second voting system, so you can vote for, so not block producers, you can vote for arbitrators, worker proposal systems, ratify, amend, all of which we have done and working in code that if EOS doesn't have yet, they could take a look at ours and just adopt it wholesale if they want. They don't have to like Telos, but the code is the code. They could take it. And then as part of that, we have an active brand new voting system. So anyone can issue a token and in their own little group, make a built-in system level voting function for whatever they want to vote for. That's another innovation. All these things are things that any other network that launches on EOSIO could look at adopting. So we're giving that back. It's very friendly. We want to be good sort of citizens of the EOSIO landscape, and that's what we're trying to be.
No, that's great. I think, Douglas, that's good stuff we heard about today. I hope that all the viewers of Investing with the Difference got a lot more insight into Telos. There's a lot of debate, I think, in Telegram channels at various places where people are not really seeing through the details. People are thinking that people talk about forks, people talk about who is better. And listening to you right now, I think what we need to understand is that this is more like creating another model and seeing and giving options to developers, giving options to people. And I remember in one of the chats and one of the comments from Dan Larimer was that he always expected a lot more chains coming out from EOS.
Yeah.
In fact, it was a big surprise for him that only one mainnet was launched with the kind of situation we were in. But I think that was a great community feeling, and I'm glad that all these things you talked about, it helped clarify some of the things. And we wish you all the best. I think there can be different of opinions. I'm sure a lot of people will agree or disagree with the approach Telos has taken, but ultimately it's about adding more developers, giving more option to the people, and continue to bring this blockchain world forward. And that's what we're all about.
4 months after EOS launched, the EOSIO, here's a testament to this, to the strength of EOSIO world. Just 4 months after the first one launched, another one is going to launch. It's going to essentially reward all the same people, right, who backed it. It's going to essentially double the transactional power of the EOSIO world, right? It's going to double the choices for developers and users. And it's not an either or, because quite frankly, the reality is people who are EOS users should just go get their Telos for free, and try it out. It's not going to use any other different, they don't need to get on any other different system. They just need to get on a multi-chain wallet, which all of the wallets are going to be multi-chain very soon. They can, all these people are looking forward to their Telos, to their Warbly airdrop tokens. Regular users soon will realize that it's all part of the same system, and it's almost going to be invisible to them. And I think that's great. I think that's the way it should be.
No, that's great. And thanks a lot, Douglas, for coming up for the show and spending this time to explain. All the best for your launch in next few days. And we will keep coming back to you for more information. So thanks once again.
Thank you, Raman. I'm hoping to see you at your San Francisco. We are going to be at the hackathon in San Francisco, and I'm hoping to stay for your conference afterwards.
Well, that's great to hear. I think we would love a bigger and bigger EOS ecosystem to join. So thanks a lot, and see you soon.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.